Don't
Stop
touch my
it.
hand.
Stop it. Stop. Stop. Stop.
Put your hands behind your back.
No.
Put your hands behind your back. No, ma'am. Can you roll your window down for me?
No.
Okay. I need to talk to you a little bit more, so that's why I wanted. And can you also turn your music down? Okay.
Is there an emergency? Is there an accident?
Ma'am, I'll be asking the questions, okay? I'm Officer Lee with Orlando Police Department. The reason you're being pulled over.
By common law.
472-45. You're being pulled over because this young man right here is not in the seatbelt. Also, your tag is not coming back to anything.
I'm almost home. I'm looking for a block away.
Okay. Did you just understand what I told you while you're being pulled over?
I heard what you said.
Okay. May I see your driver's license, your registration, and your proof of insurance? Ma'am?
I lost my driver's license.
Oh,
I don't feel comfortable with y'all. This is like, no, do not open that car door. No.
man.
No, I am not getting out the car.
You don't want to do this in
I'm
front of
not
me.
doing, I'm not
Okay,
doing
turn
anything.
the call for me. See
I
that?
don't feel comfortable with y'all.
I understand
I have
that.
That's
fine.
I have my rights. And I
Okay.
do not feel comfortable with any of this. I lost all my dang information just a few days ago.
Well, ma'am, the first
But I
thing
can give you my
don't
name.
you don't dictate us how we do a traffic
Man,
stop.
yes
Okay.
I do.
No,
Because
no,
I
you
don't
don't.
feel comfortable. Yes I do. I already went through this with somebody
I
else.
understand that.
No, I don't feel comfortable.
Okay.
And yes,
you
I'm
need
going
to
to do this in
step out
front of my
the vehicle.
kids. No.
Okay.
No, I don't feel comfortable.
Ma'am, you really don't want to do this.
So y'all going to yank me out my car?
Ma'am, we're telling you by law to get out of the vehicle. We are
By law?
by
For
law
what?
we're allowed to
For
control
what?
the occupancy of the vehicle.
So you're
Because
so
you
I
don't have
so
registration
because I
of
don't
the
have
vehicle.
the information for you.
You won't turn off the vehicle
No,
like we
I'm not,
asked.
'cause I don't
So
feel
now we're
comfortable.
asking you to step out of the vehicle.
No. No, I'm calling my husband.
Ma'am,
I don't feel
I've already told you why you've been pulled over, okay?
Give me the ticket.
Okay. I can't even confirm who you are right now.
I just told you I can give you my name.
Don't
Stop
touch
it.
my hand.
Stop it. Stop. Stop. Stop.
Put your hands behind your back.
No.
Put your hands behind your back.
You don't make no goddamn sense. I'm suing the shit out of y'all. And you better put my dress up.
Yes, ma'am, we have a female. They'll be able to do that for you, okay?
All right, let's get her up.
No, don't get me up because I'm...
Fix her. You fix her.
Pull her. Yeah, pull her.
Here, come take her legs.
Let's switch.
Do me a favor. Double lock those my pool or something. Oh, it's just a cramp. Those kids are.
I told you I
all
could give
you
my
need to
name.
do is
I already went through all of
cooperate
this
with
shit
us.
with y'all
All right.
before. And
Okay.
same damn concept. I
All right.
told the other officer the
Let's
same
go on
thing.
this
I told the officer, get my Marine Corps tag off of there.
Trying to put you. There you go. Where's it? Let me get the other side first. Make sure it doesn't fall down.
It's not that kind of dress. It's
It's
a
not?
tube. Nope.
Okay. Just want to make sure everything's good.
All right. Is she covered
Yep.
under there? Let's get her
We're
up.
good.
Come on up
Bend your
now.
knees. Bend your knees. Sit up. No, sit up. There you go.
Come on up.
There you go.
Do you have any identification in that car?
I got a common law tag.
Okay, that's not her identification.
It is. Y'all got 5 of y'all for
Melody.
one little bitty person?
Now, this would have
992
went a
Gardner.
whole different way if you just gave your ID.
I didn't have no ID.
Okay, you gotta be able to provide an ID.
I
if
don't
you don't,
have one. I
if
said I
you,
had a common law
Look.
tag and y'all still not answering me.
That's
I mean,
not-
y'all recognize me.
The situation quickly escalates when the officer gives a clear and lawful command for the driver to turn off the vehicle and step out. In a traffic stop, officers have legal authority to control the scene for safety, including ordering occupants out of the car. Instead of complying, the driver repeatedly refuses, saying she doesn't feel comfortable and insisting on her rights, which creates immediate noncompliance. As the officer tries to confirm her identity, she continues to ignore basic instructions like lowering her music and providing identification. Legally, a driver is required to identify themselves during a stop, and refusing to do so can justify further action. The officer gives multiple warnings, making it clear that failure to comply will lead to removal from the vehicle. When officers move to take control, the situation crosses into active resistance. The driver physically resists as they attempt to remove her, which legally shifts the encounter from a simple traffic stop into a resisting an officer situation. At that point, officers are justified in using reasonable force to detain her. She is then placed in handcuffs while continuing to argue that her rights are being violated. However, from a legal perspective, the arrest is not just about the initial violations. It's driven by her refusal to follow lawful commands and the physical resistance that followed, turning a routine stop into a custodial arrest.
Violate every constitutional right. That's fine.
Promise you, we're not violating
Yes, you are. My right to travel, my right to privacy. You yanked me out of my car. You reached your hand inside of my private vehicle. Tried it automobile. I apologize for that.
So,
No, but
you're going to be able to provide
for somebody else.
No, see,
5 other cops did this shit to me.
All right, man, I'm going to read you something. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You got a right to remain silent. Do you understand? Anything you say may be used in court. Do you understand? You got a right to talk to a lawyer before and during question. Do you understand? If you cannot afford a lawyer and want one, one will be provided to you before question or without charge. Do you understand? Has anyone threatened you or promised you anything to get you to talk to me? Do you want to talk about today? It seems to have some type of characters that look like private. That's not a tag that somebody is going to give you in the state of Florida. Also, when I'm asking for your driver's license, and I'm asking you to turn down the vehicle so I can hear your name and your date of birth a little properly, instead of you having the music up loud, that's just so I can hear you a little bit better. You have not been identified at that time. I still need to make sure I get a photograph of you. Just because you give me some information that says...
I didn't give you any information. In fact, you didn't even ask me my name. You just kept asking to have my music turned down, which I told you no.
Everything's on body camera.
I know it's on body camera, so we can talk about that when we go to court.
I asked you for your name and ID. You know, I'd rather have your ID so I can get a picture.
I can give you my name. I don't have any ID. I told you that I lost that. So if you want to sit here and continue to make up little stuff to make your case.
At this point, the encounter shifts into a post-arrest phase where officers clearly explain the legal basis for the situation. The officer informs her that she is under arrest and begins outlining the reasons, including the issue with the license plate and her failure to properly identify herself during the stop. Legally, once a person is detained and cannot confirm their identity, officers are allowed to take additional steps to verify who they are. The officer also addresses her earlier refusal to follow instructions, such as turning down the music and cooperating during questioning. From a legal standpoint, these actions are important because they contributed to probable cause for the arrest. It's not just the traffic violation anymore. It's the combination of noncompliance and obstruction of the investigation. The driver continues to argue that her rights were violated, specifically mentioning privacy and her belief that she didn't have to exit the vehicle. However, under established law, officers are permitted to order drivers out during a lawful traffic stop, and refusal can lead to arrest. Her claims reflect a misunderstanding of those legal boundaries. Despite her objections, the officer maintains a calm explanation, reinforcing that the arrest is based on her actions during the stop. This moment highlights a key legal principle. Once lawful orders are given during a traffic stop, refusing to comply can escalate the situation into a criminal matter, regardless of the driver's personal beliefs about their rights.
And we will go from there, okay?
Yeah.
All right. Stupid, can you slide her seatbelt over to me on the other side?
I don't need a seatbelt.
Well, I'm going to put one on for you.
I already talked about this.
Well, just in case we get into a wreck, I'm going to put your seatbelt on, okay?
Can I have the female do it? I want the female to do it. I want the female.
Everything's on body camera, ma'am. You will be A-okay.
Like the last time.
How you doing, boss?
Yeah, okay. Not really good.
Yeah.
Okay, you there?
Yes.
Okay. You ever? No, what I have is all of my permits is in my truck.
I confirmed him on my computer. He's registered to the VIN of the vehicle.
He's registered to the
Yes,
vehicle?
yes.
Okay. But you don't have a I was talking about for the tag. Remember the paperwork for the tag?
That is in other business. I was at the PA and I was other places, and I have a business. And what was going on is that I had all that in the vehicle, and I let my buddy keep the truck
Okay.
And everything is in
You're
the
supposed to have your registration in the vehicle.
Okay, I know what I'm supposed to do, sir.
Okay.
I understand that.
Okay.
I understand what I'm supposed to do.
Okay.
But you said, one of you said that my wife resisted.
Yes. That was me.
And that's because she's terrified of you guys.
Well, I mean, she still got to abide by the law. I mean, I'm telling her to get out the vehicle, and she's saying no. And then when we try to get out of the vehicle, she can't swing and hit at the police. I'm just telling you, you can't do that. You follow what I'm saying? We wouldn't even be here if she would have just gave the officer our identification and just complied with what we were requesting. Excuse me. Here you go.
So that's the thing. Ray-Ban glasses.
Are we done with the traffic stop?
I am.
I don't want to reach around in the vehicle. You done with it?
Are you serious?
Yes, sir.
I'm a United States Marine. I did 27 years, dude. I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah, I got a family, there's a bunch of family that's been in the Marines, okay? Yeah. So, we're done with the traffic stop. Here's my card. Okay? All right?
Look at the center console. Is your mother's wallet in there?
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate it, y'all. As the situation settles, the difference in approach becomes clear. The driver is already under arrest, but when her husband arrives, he stays calm, answers questions, and cooperates with officers. Because of that, officers are able to quickly verify the vehicle information and move forward without further issues. They explain that the vehicle still cannot be legally driven due to the improper tag, reinforcing that registration laws must be followed regardless of the situation. From a legal standpoint, the violation still stands even if ownership is later confirmed. This moment highlights a key contrast. While one person's resistance led to arrest and additional charges, the other's cooperation helped de-escalate the situation. In the end, it shows how compliance during a lawful stop can make a major difference in the outcome.
"50-year-old victim."
What are you guys doing?
She stole my keys. I'm trying to get my keys from her. Where are my keys, man?
Who are you?
I don't have your keys. I need my glasses.
You do have them. You just had them in your hand. Put them out of my hand.
I don't have anything.
Madison, where are my keys?
I need my glasses.
Give me my keys, Madison. You just broke my chain.
He's cheating on me. I'm sorry.
Where do you guys live?
Madison, where are my keys?
Who's this
sorry,
guy?
I can't drink.
Listen, can you please give me my keys?
I don't think she don't have any pockets to put anything in there.
It's in her jacket, bro.
I don't have anything.
Madison, where's my keys?
I want my
Where
glasses.
are my keys, Madison? You just broke the ring. Where is the keys?
They probably went everywhere.
Well, find them.
Madison.
I don't have my glasses.
Madison, go sit over there in my car, please.
I need my glasses.
Go sit over there. I will look for it. Just go sit over there. Madison!
I don't want to leave.
Sit over there. Just get away.
I need my stuff.
Madison? Just hang out near my car and I'm going to look for your glasses. Stop. Stop. Is those her glasses or yours?
No, those are her glasses. Wait, where she put them?
Madison, come here. Hey, bro, there's your keys right there.
Where?
Look there.
Thank you.
Stop crying.
Madison, go away, man.
Stop.
Leave me alone. Don't follow me, man. What's going on?
We need our stuff.
Walk over here.
I need my stuff.
Come over here. Come over here.
His chain on me.
Okay, so why are we... Where's your ID?
I don't have it on me.
What the hell is going on?
Bro, listen. I'm walking to the hotel. She chases after me because I'm talking to the neighbor.
Okay.
Then she fucking attacks me, trying to grab my phone and my keys.
Okay, how are you guys related? What is this, your
That's
girlfriend?
yeah.
Okay.
What am I to you?
Alright. You have an ID with you?
No, it's in the room.
Alright, I'll get your info in a minute. I'm gonna take this for right now, okay? I'll give it back to you in a minute.
Yeah, sure.
We've lived here for 3 months now.
K92, one by name, out of Virginia.
I can't believe this.
The incident begins with officers arriving to find both individuals arguing on the side of the road, which already raises concern from a legal standpoint. When police respond to a disturbance like this, their first priority is to separate the parties and figure out whether a crime has occurred, especially if there are signs the situation may have turned physical. As officers start asking questions, Madison appears confused and emotional, repeatedly asking for her keys and glasses, while also accusing the man of cheating. This kind of behavior is important because it shows a highly volatile situation, which officers must control to prevent further escalation. At the same time, the male subject begins explaining that she chased him and tried to take his belongings. From a legal perspective, officers are gathering statements from both sides while also observing behavior. The male claims she attacked him and attempted to grab his phone and keys, which could already point toward potential assault or battery. Meanwhile, Madison denies having anything and continues to interrupt, making it harder for officers to get clear information. Officers then begin separating them and instruct Madison to stay by the patrol car. This is a lawful command used to control the scene and ensure safety. However, she refuses to fully cooperate, continues approaching the other individual, and keeps arguing. At this stage, officers are building the foundation of the case, looking at statements, behavior, and control of the scene before deciding whether a crime has actually taken place.
I've seen couples arguing a lot.
On the side of US 1?
Everywhere.
Grabbing each other, holding on each other? I don't.
Let me see your face real quick. You want an ambulance or anything? Come check you out.
She broke my arm, bro.
She what?
She hit me with a 2x4.
Where did that happen at?
Right here. I'm trying to get away from her, man.
Do you want an ambulance? Come check you out real quick.
Yeah, maybe I should, man.
Alright, that's fine. Saying she hit him with a 2x4.
I haven't seen anything, did you?
He was trying.
Hold it out again. Just put it straight out.
I can't put it
right now.
Oh, yeah, I see that. Hey, sir, where exactly at Days Inn did this happen? In the lobby, on the back parking lot?
I was walking inside, so...
Apparently by some furniture that is in the parking lot because they're remodeling it.
What is that? Is that an ambulance?
Yep.
Coming for him?
Yeah.
Why?
He's hurt, I guess.
He's not hurt.
He looks hurt.
He's not hurt.
Okay, well, they'll decide that.
There's a bite on him.
Why does he have a bite on him?
Because when we were arguing earlier, I was trying to get the keys and I bit him.
Do you want her arrested?
What?
Do you want her arrested?
You guys want you?
Yeah. And I know you may have already explained to one of them, but can you explain to me what the relationship is between you guys?
She's like a really good friend of mine. Like, like we date, okay? But like, I wouldn't, you know what I'm saying?
You used to date?
No, we date.
Okay.
So, anyways, I went to...
Are you currently dating or no?
Like, it's hard to explain, bro. I figured you know what I was...
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
You guys have sex?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
but your relationship is... It's sex-oriented.
Right.
When you say you date, you're being polite.
No, I'm
You guys are like friends with benefits, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
You guys living in the same apartment? I mean, the same hotel room?
Yeah, she came down to visit me while I was down here.
How long is she visiting you for?
That's what I'm saying, bro. I've been to a really good
Just from what?
I've been to a really good bathroom.
No, but how long has she been visiting you for?
Signal 14, holding a 68.
So you're not actually, she's not actually your girlfriend, you guys are friends with benefits.
Right.
We were unable to make contact.
So anyway, bro,
At this stage, the investigation shifts from just statements to physical evidence. The male victim tells officers he was hit with a piece of wood and points out his injuries, including marks on his arm. From a legal perspective, visible injuries play a major role because they support claims of battery and help officers determine what actually happened. Officers also begin checking the scene for possible weapons and confirm that there was broken furniture nearby that could match his story. This kind of corroboration is important because police don't rely on just words. They look for physical evidence that backs up a claim. When Madison is questioned, she admits to biting him during the argument. That admission is critical because under the law, intentionally causing physical harm, even during a personal dispute, meets the definition of battery. At this point, officers are no longer dealing with just a verbal argument. They now have both injuries and a confession. The victim also makes it clear that this isn't the first time something like this has happened, which further supports the officer's decision-making. Based on the total evidence, injuries, witness statements, and her own admission, officers establish probable cause, moving the situation firmly into a domestic violence case that requires legal action.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we both did. But he was trying to put a slide back on, and she grabbed his leg. I'm like, what are you doing?
Then she said she bit him. So.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I'm not lying, bro.
Nobody said you're lying. Nobody said you're lying.
Oh, I thought you were saying like, oh, okay.
No. I saw her.
Okay.
For what? So that they can get to the hospital?
Why are you pressing charges?
In the state of Florida, you guys are a couple. The state of Florida is pressing charges. You confirmed that you bit him, and you also grabbed him on the foot when I was standing right here. So you're under arrest for domestic. Can you?
Yeah. But, Clay, you have to get me out.
You're gonna let go of this, or I'm breaking it out of your hands. So don't even play games with me.
I didn't realize. I'm sorry. You can have it.
You have anything else on you?
No. Clay, you have to get me out.
1782, K9 Cheers, adult female, 715.
2023.
Come on.
Oh my God.
Down the other side.
Okay.
I have to get my medication.
Okay. They only accept it at the jail anyway. You just have to tell them what you're on. They don't accept medication at the jail.
They did last time.
They don't do now, trust me. I won't lie to you because
You can't do it.
And this too. She bit me 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, she said that. You were in that much pain when I first got here.
Well, bro, it takes time for it to
No, it don't.
Yeah, it does, apparently, because it wasn't hurting this bad before.
I'm gonna leave.
Just.
God damn, you should broke my fucking
see your
arm,
arm?
bro.
Just let your other arm let go. Let me see.
God damn.
Oh, yeah. Oh. You do have a...
Hurts, man.
You need to go to the hospital. Because you do have a bulge there. Anything else? Oh, what else?
She bit me in my arm.
Can you show me that? Oh, there you go.
You got 36 on that.
In the final moments, the full legal picture comes together. Officers document the victim's injuries, including bite marks and swelling, which strengthens the battery charge. From a legal standpoint, visible injuries combined with earlier statements and Madison's own admission provide strong probable cause for arrest. The victim also tells officers that this kind of behavior has happened before, even though it was never reported. While past incidents may not always lead to charges, they help officers understand the pattern of behavior and seriousness of the situation. Madison, now in custody, becomes emotional and worried about jail, medication, and contacting someone. However, at this stage, the legal process is already in motion. Once probable cause for domestic battery is established, especially in a domestic situation, officers are required to proceed with the arrest under state law. In the end, what started as a roadside argument turns into a clear case of domestic violence. The evidence, her own admission, and the victim's injuries all lead to one outcome: an arrest and formal charges. This highlights how quickly a personal dispute can become a criminal case when it turns physical.
Tell her she can think about that tonight.
What? You can go back to the hotel, I'll meet you there. I got a little paperwork to fill out, and I need to take photos of that chair. So if you want to go back that way, I'll meet you there.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're walking to your car right now.
Numbers of those. Oh, yeah. We'll go up, so we'll run down here. Oh, yeah. 22. 24.
Hello. Hey. Sorry about you. We're looking for Jasmine? She's not here. We're trying to make sure she's okay. I gotta see her and talk to her. Can you call her?
Are we allowed in? Can we enter?
My camera's not okay.
As officers arrive at the residence, the situation is still in the investigation phase. From a legal standpoint, they are responding to a reported assault involving pepper spray, which is considered a weapon in many states. Their goal here is to locate the suspect, ensure everyone is safe, and gather initial information. Officers make contact with the parents and explain why they are there, making it clear they need to speak with Jasmine. Since they don't have a warrant, they don't force entry and instead rely on communication and consent, which is standard legal procedure in these situations. They attempt to call her, and eventually she confirms she is nearby and agrees to return. This is important because it shows voluntary cooperation at this stage. Officers then wait outside rather than escalating the situation, which keeps everything calm and controlled. Overall, this part highlights how police handle early-stage investigations, focusing on communication, confirming details, and avoiding unnecessary force while building the foundation for what could become a criminal case.
Hello, Jasmine. Where are you? The cops are here.
We should talk to her.
Oh, they want to talk to you. Are you downstairs? You walk into the house now? Okay. They just want to see you. Okay.
Is it okay if we meet her in the front?
They're gonna meet you downstairs.
Oh, she hung up.
At the front.
She already hung up. She hung up. Just call her.
She's coming up here, she said?
Yeah, she parked, but she's walking.
Just want to talk to her, that's it.
That's all it is, pretty much.
Alright?
Alright. We'll talk to her downstairs. If anything, like, she'll come back up or we'll let you know.
Okay.
Alright? You're welcome. Either you come, or they're gonna keep coming here every night. I'm gonna bother you. So you fucking don't make matters worse. She said she was a block away. She parked. Someone walking?
Yeah. Jasmine? Hey.
How are you?
Let's talk in here. It's too cold outside. What happened back at your ex-boyfriend's house?
Nothing. I just dropped him off.
Okay. Well, he called us, so he didn't. So basically, he got sprayed in the face with pepper spray? No.
You don't have any pepper spray on you or anything like that?
Nothing.
I'm sorry, just mind taking your hands out of the pocket.
So just tell me what happened, because I got his side of the story. I want to hear your side.
Nothing happened. I just dropped him off.
So how did he get pepper sprayed?
I don't know.
You don't know?
He's coming up with that.
Well, I saw him. He's pepper sprayed. He got sprayed in the face.
I'm letting you know that I don't know about that.
Okay. All right. So he's saying that you pepper sprayed him. That's what he
Who is
said.
that? Is that your current boyfriend or an ex-boyfriend?
I'm not dating him. We're not together.
Were you ever together in the past?
In the past, years ago, but we're not currently together.
Okay. So
what were you guys doing tonight?
We were getting food.
Okay. Where did you get food?
Some pizzeria on the west side.
Okay. And then did you guys have an argument or anything like that?
No, I literally just dropped him off at home, and then he forgot his laundry bag in my car, so I told him to come get it. And then I gave him his stuff, but when I went to give him back his phone, he was trying to like put his hand, he was like standing outside of the driver's seat door. And he was trying to like put his hands in the car while I was driving.
okay.
That's pretty
Yeah,
much.
so you
and then I
never
literally
sprayed him? You
No,
never did nothing?
literally
Just
never
saw
got
it.
out of the car.
Okay. Well, he told us that you sprayed him. And then, just do me a favor, just put your bag on the ground real quick.
I'll hold it for you.
Alright. You'll be placed under arrest for domestic violence aggravated assault. Okay.
I'll hold it.
No, wait.
You're being placed under arrest, ma'am.
Okay, how do you go? Okay.
So listen.
Can you give me 1 second? I'm not.
It's not
I'm
1 second. We're not going to
resisting or
debate. We're not going to debate. But right now.
Debate what?
You're-
Bro, stop. Bro, what the fuck is wrong?
Stop.
Stop! You're hurting me!
Just give up your hands and that's it. Plain and simple. Stop.
Oh, yeah. Hurting me! I'm not resisting!
You're not going back and stop.
You're hurting me! You're hurting me!
Stop resisting. Let go of the bag.
Why am I getting arrested? You're not even letting me. Oh, no, you didn't. You didn't tell me shit, yo. What the fuck? Stop! You're gonna break my heart! Stop! Stop! You're pushing me against the door! Get off of me!
Stop!
You got it?
You're gonna break my arm! What the fuck is wrong with you, bro? How the fuck am I getting arrested when I never did anything? Can you? Yo, stop holding me like that, yo. You're gonna break my fucking arm. Stop holding me like that.
Stop trying to get away.
I'm not trying to get away.
Stop.
What the fuck are you talking about? My nigga, you're lying. You're trying to lie right now. You're gonna break my fucking arm.
Stop moving around.
Stop holding me like that.
84. He's putting me out with those.
You can literally make this shit mad easier. You're making it uncomfortable on purpose. The fuck, bro?
Stop it.
Stop squeezing my arm, yo.
Stop.
Sorry.
So stop.
Don't
You're
make it worse than what it is.
I'm not trying to. It just hurts so bad.
Okay. But whose fault
You're
is it?
being aggressive as fuck. I already told you that it hurts. So what? How much easier does it work?
You've been fighting us this weekend. Stop.
I'm not fighting you.
Yes, you are.
I'm trying to tell you what's comfortable and what's uncomfortable. You can't fucking respect that.
She has that on?
Nothing. I have my mom's car keys. Can I please give them back to her? She has work in the morning. What are you doing?
Step in. All that for nothing, right?
As Jasmine arrives, officers immediately begin questioning her about the incident. She denies everything, claiming nothing happened and that she simply dropped her ex-boyfriend off. However, from a legal standpoint, officers already have a victim statement and visible evidence that pepper spray was used, which gives them reasonable grounds to investigate further. As they ask more direct questions, her story starts to show gaps. She admits there was some interaction when he reached into her car, but still denies using pepper spray. In situations like this, officers compare both sides, but physical evidence and the victim's condition carry significant weight in establishing probable cause. Once officers determine there is enough evidence, they move to place her under arrest for simple assault. At that moment, the situation escalates again, not because of the initial incident, but because of her reaction. She begins to physically resist, pulling away and refusing to give her hands, which legally adds another charge of resisting arrest. Officers then use necessary force to gain control and secure her in handcuffs. Despite her claims that she did nothing wrong, the arrest is based on the victim's statement, supporting evidence, and her lack of cooperation. This moment shows how quickly denying and resisting can turn a single allegation into multiple charges.
Okay. Ella va a estar arrestada, ¿ok? Es el violencia doméstica, pero agresivo, ¿ok? Ella le hizo pepper spray al exnovio. Él nos llamó, estaba todo, y ahora nos peleó.
Tenemos una criada.
Ajá. So, nosotros tranquila, estamos hablando, le dijimos, y ahí es cuando empezó con nosotros.
Ay, Dios mío.
So, para ahorita es la violencia doméstica agresivo contra el exnovio, creo que es.
Sí, sí.
So,
No sé qué podemos nosotros hacer.
ahorita no hay nada que hacer, porque es un adulto, ya. Entonces vamos a ver, ¿ella estaba arrestada antes?
No.
¿Primera vez?
Sí.
Que nosotros sabemos, sí.
Pero ha tenido, que nosotros sepamos, sí, porque ha tenido muchos problemas con ese exnovio. Siempre, o ella le llama a la policía a él, es una relación así. Y nosotros siempre, deja a ese muchacho, no te conviene. Pero es lo mismo que ella se puso a discutir con ella.
Yeah. So, eso es, nada más. Ok, si sale, le decimos que te llamen ustedes para ir a recoger si quiere. Si no, ella puede llamar a un taxi o cualquier cosa.
Y entonces, ¿qué tiempo duraría ella arrestada?
1 hora y media, casi. Si usted quiere, usted puede llamar el desk de nosotros, a ver si él se va para la cárcel o no.
In the end, the case comes down to evidence and actions, not just words. What started as a claim of being pepper sprayed quickly turned into a full investigation, where officers relied on the victim's condition, statements, and inconsistencies in Jasmine's story to establish probable cause. The situation escalated further when she resisted arrest, adding more charges on top of the original assault. From a legal perspective, once officers have enough evidence, refusing to comply only makes the outcome worse. This case highlights a key point. When physical evidence supports a victim's claim, denial alone is not enough to avoid arrest. Combined with resistance, it often leads to more serious consequences. In the end, what may have seemed like a moment she could walk away from resulted in multiple charges, showing how quickly a situation can spiral when actions don't match the evidence.
You make a right, somebody open that other. Watch out for big step. So, switch over. Can you slide over? Please, thank you. Stay standing.
Just watch out with her, she got mad blood on her.
Just take her hands off.
crazy.